And now I'm gonna turn things over to Nicole. Again, Nicole is the National Keystone Agreement. Oh, there's Brian. National Keystone Agreement Partnership Coordinator. Again, gonna give a little bit of an update on how those agreements are rolling out. So hand it over to you, Nicole.
Great. Thank you for having me. If you can't hear me or anything, just let me know. But yeah, my name is Nicole Hutt. I've joined the partnership office within the last 6 months, like a lot of you, kind of filling in a role that is needed to continue to help coordinate and move this larger goals and the the urgency felt and needed around the wildfire crisis landscape investments and the bipartisan infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act funding that came down from Congress. It was a really good conversation in the breakout room I was in. It was really thanks for letting me engage in that too. I look forward to seeing all those notes because I think in my role, I work out of the National Partnership Office for the Washington office of the Forest Service. And that's one of the goals that we have is to try to continue to help coordinate on and off of wildfire crisis landscapes where partners are helping the Forest Service achieve the broader goals of this integrated resource accomplishments across landscapes, meaning just a national forest system landscapes, and not just stopping there too, right? The boundaries continue, the boundary stops, but the landscape continues. So whether it's private or other federal lands or state lands and tribal lands that we're engaging on, you guys, the partners, are really where we can continue that work across boundaries. So I really appreciate being part of this discussion. I'll briefly share out as the Keystone Agreement Coordinator. I just really facilitate conversations, right? Everyone is doing the work in the weeds of those partnerships. The program managers are the main contacts and people getting into the work that's happening across the forest system lands and landscapes. But I facilitate those conversations and look for opportunities to coordinate amongst the partners because, as you guys know really well, there's on a landscape there could be multiple partners implementing different projects across different pieces of land and with different objectives and then related outcomes. So I'll just share. I don't have a lot of time with you, but I want to leave time for questions. I'm going to attempt to share a document that the facilitators can also send out afterwards. It's just really a list here of the Keystone Agreement partners that the Forest Service is currently engaging with at a national level through bipartisan infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act funds. And really, like the document will go in and describe, but a lot of them have very similar objectives and focus for the national partnership, the broad partnership. Now, where you guys are working at a regional and forest level, that broad description of the work might have filter down to different specific on the ground implementation projects. But generally speaking, at a national level, we're working with many partners you guys might have already heard of, the Nature Conservancy. And one thing to note, I think they have several agreements related to the bipartisan infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act work, and specifically a unique attribute is their prescribed fire implementation that's unique to that organization. And then with the National Forest Foundation, the Mule Deer Foundation, and the National Wild Turkey Federation, among other work that they are trying to do, maybe mission focused for those organizations, the two wildlife focused organizations, and then the National Forest Foundation with multiple integrated accomplishment outlooks. They have specific to them a master stewardship agreement. And really that entails the ability to exchange goods for services off Forest Service land. So a product, most often saw timber might come off of a project, and those agreements allow for the exchange of the goods for the services. Maybe it's a fuels reduction project or a wildlife habitat improvement project. And then Trout Unlimited, they have funds from from specific provisions related to stream restoration corridor and other specific provisions that came out of the bipartisan infrastructure law that you can read more about in mine land reclamation, etc. Student Conservation Association and AmeriCorps and CCC are our workforce development program partners that we have national Keystone agreements with, and those are partners that obviously are focused on enhancing our workforce and bringing capacity through various authorities, Public Land Corps and other authorities that the Forest Service has for hiring. And specifically when they're funded out of these pieces of legislation, they're working to do very similar work. And it's a way to increase partner capacity. That's something that we've been working to coordinate in my role among other partners, that the workforce development program Keystone agreements are funded and provide an opportunity to bring workforce capacity to the work we're all trying to accomplish. There's these new agreements that have come out in this fiscal year of 2024 with 3 new partners, new to the Forest Service, I'll say, partners that are new to the Forest Service, and they're the Minority Farmers of the South, the National Baptist Convention, and PEK Services. They've worked with other federal agencies, and so they're not new to working with the federal government, but their portfolios are, being pretty targeted and rolled out to regions, and also brought in with the older, I'd say the FY22 and 23 partners to really assist where, other places are pretty at capacity with the amount of work they can take on. So a lot of the agreements and the program that the Wildfire Risk and Infrastructure team is helping to coordinate, Wildfire Risk Reduction Infrastructure team is coordinating, is really targeted at like a unit, a non-wildfire crisis unit, but that might still be doing work that involves hazardous fuels reduction in the WUI. So targeted at high priority fire sheds, and opportunities to help make sure a project can continue, right? So an example that comes to mind for me is where a NEPA document is already in place, and while these agreements don't have the authority to remove good for services, these are participating agreements, they can still facilitate the necessary work items and project needs associated with getting that work done, the veg removal. So for example, road improvements, bridge and culvert replacement projects. So infrastructure needs is a highlight, but they can do many other services too under their agreements. And then we have the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, which has the America the Beautiful Challenge, and you can read all about that, but those projects were rolled out earlier in the process of Keystone agreements and have multiple federal agencies aimed at, improvements across public lands. And American Forest and then soon to be coming online will be the Arbor Day Foundation, assisting with reforestation needs. That is funded through the Replant Act that was made permanent in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And they're prioritizing reforestation needs really as a result of the large fires in 2020 and then going forward. And then again in 2024, we're looking to work with the Office of Tribal Relations to ideally release national tribal Keystone agreements. So that's more in progress. Nothing specific to speak to at this point, but to be continued. So those are like a current 12 agreements, but 14 by the end of 2024 is what we're looking to have. And I guess I'd touch on that, through all these partnerships, these larger partnerships, the idea is right at the local level where everyone is working, that these provide an opportunity to tap into resources that the agency, an unprecedented amount of funding that we received in such a short time span. And really the ability to move out and react to what, is deemed a crisis. So that, the short spurt of funding comes with a lot of challenges, but also ideally is what what leadership has been describing as a down payment on the need to really get a long-term investment in the lands and address the fuels reduction needs in the high priority areas. And I think, yeah, well, I'll stop there and see if there are any immediate questions, and then if there's time, however much time you think we have.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nicole. We actually need to move on to our
Okay.
presentation, but Nick popped one in the chat that maybe we could get to quickly. And then if others have questions, feel free to put those in the chat box, and Nicole will get those to you to answer via kind of a follow-up email with our report out. So Nick asked, is it correct that all of these Keystone agreements include multi-year funding obligations embedded within new master agreements? How far out do most of those funding obligations stretch?
Most of the Keystone agreements, so those details aren't, lined out in this document, but many of them were either completely funded off the top, so they received all the funding. Toronto Limited, for example, received the funding for the projects that were listed. And then others were with a target funding level that they were associated with, right? So the Washington office held funds, and they've all been obligated at this point, those funds aside for some of those agreements. And then landscapes, wildfire crisis landscapes, were then able to utilize their funds and make those connections with the agreements through agreements on their areas, and use their own funds to add to the agreements. So I'm not seeing the question. If there's a second part to it.
It's in the chat box if you'd like to read it, but
Yeah.
how far out do most of those funding obligations stretch?
Well, depends on the agreement. So the master stewardship agreements are 20 years, but the legislation themselves don't allow for the funds to go that long. The idea would be that the agreements, if the projects weren't finished, if additional legislation comes available, we can add that to these agreements, or forests can use their normal appropriations to fund projects through the agreements. But none of the funding has a committed timeline out into the future. It just depends on how much and how the program of work on the forest, the need and availability of those funds. So for many of the participating agreements, they last between 5 and 8 years. And like I said, the stewardship agreements go up to 20 years in length for the authority of the agreement.
Got it, but funding timeline is shorter than that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks, Nicole. And again, if you're willing, folks,
Yeah.
Please feel welcome to put more questions in the chat box, and we'll get those to Nicole to answer after the session.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out, and thanks for having me.
Great. Yeah, if you want to put your email in the chat box, if that's something you want to share, feel free. Cool. Well, thanks, Nicole. And Lee, if we could get all of our panelists and myself and Cole spotlighted, we're going to switch gears a little bit and get over to our panel discussion. We have some awesome panelists from, again, Southwest Idaho, Northern New Mexico, and Northern California with Nick, JR, and Brian. These folks have some really kind of great insights and deep experience with partnerships on these landscapes and kind of reflections on how those are operating and adapting within the context of the wildfire crisis strategy. So we are just excited to get to have them share their experiences with you all and really kind of do a little bit even deeper dive than where our breakout discussions were touching on. So we'll start with just each of them are going to give a brief context setting kind of intro to their landscape and partnerships, and then we're going to transition to a panel discussion. And for participants, feel free to, again, throw questions in the chat box if you'd like Cole and I to work those into our panel questions. With that, I think I'm going to turn it over. Anything else, Cole, that I was forgetting before I hand it over? Okay.
No.
Great. Kick it over to you, Brian.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I've got a short presentation. I'm hoping I can get done in 5 minutes or less. Oh, it's not quite working. Are you guys seeing the presentation or my notes?
Notes version, right?
Gotcha. All right, let's try this one more time. Just
Yeah, now you should be able to just start that presentation.
okay. All right, for those of you who haven't met me yet, my name is Brian Davis, and I'm the South Idaho Shared Stewardship Coordinator. I'm a Payette National Forest employee, shared with the Boise, and I work as a liaison slash shared employee with Idaho Department of Lands for our Shared Stewardship Initiative. And today I'm going to touch on within the Southwest Idaho WCS landscape, how we're working with partners through shared stewardship and county GNA agreements. So I'm guessing many of you have heard of the term shared stewardship, but didn't realize there was a nationwide Forest Service initiative called shared stewardship. It was rolled out in 2018 by then Chief Vicki Christensen. Shared stewardship is essentially based on three pillars, and that's big problems require big solutions, so we need to work at larger scales. The second pillar is that fire doesn't really care whose land it's on, so cross-boundary solutions are needed. And then the third was that we are going to be joint priority setting with our partners. So our partners will have an equal seat at the table. So Idaho was the first state in the nation to sign a master agreement back in 2018. Shared stewardship, what we are calling our priority landscapes, were designated and drawn by the IDL state forester and the regional foresters from Region 1 and Region 4. And the map you're seeing on the right there, the red is the boundary for our shared stewardship southern priority landscape, and the green is the wildfire crisis strategy landscape. We've since done some editing to our southern priority landscape to pick up that boot at the bottom. So when we signed that shared stewardship agreement, we had some goals, and basically there's really only two defined and measurable goals. And the first one is that we're going to work with partners to double the annual acres treated on Idaho's national forest. And then we'll also work with partners to promote cross-boundary work and treatments on other lands within the priority landscapes, primarily private land. And so being the first one in the nation, there was no playbook for how we went about this. And so starting in 2019, we hired these two shared coordinator positions. My predecessor started then, and I came onto the program in 2022. And these coordinators are Forest Service employees that are housed in IDL offices. And for the first year, we spent most of our time recruiting counties and other federal agencies as partners. And the reason for that is we wanted to bring all these partners to the table and identify focal areas within our landscapes and get our partners to commit to projects. So the hash marked polygons you see are two of our focal areas. The northern one is called the Highway 95 corridor focal area. And when I say having our partners commit to projects, the Forest Service committed a project within that focal area. The BLM committed, Adams County Soil and Water Conservation District, and then Adams County themselves. So everybody came together and said, listen, we believe this area is our highest priority right now. And if we're going to get real work done, everybody has got to commit a project now. And so, did I lose my screen share?
Yeah, it looks like it.
Not sure what happened there.
There we go. We can see it if you can, Brian.
Okay. So I put this slide up here because I wanted to highlight, some of the funding mechanisms that we had and the partners we were working with. But if you notice on here, the Forest Service has the Wyden Authority listed, but there was no funding behind that. So the Wyden Authority or Wyden agreements, if you're not familiar with them, allow the Forest Service to spend funding on non-forest system lands if there is a mutual benefit. And so when we partnered with IDL, the governor's office set aside a pot of funds, and we call it the S2 funding for shared stewardship. But they also had a number of grants that they can put to our cooperators, primarily counties. And then, the Forest Service makes Title III funds through SRS available through the counties. So how does this all tie in with Good Neighbor Authority agreements in the WCS? Well, shared stewardship came before WCS. It was designed to be a long-term durable partnership between interested agencies to start building out these larger scale cross-boundary projects. As I mentioned, there wasn't a lot of Forest Service funds available at the time. So we worked with our partners for over 12 months to put together a Joint Chiefs application. The Joint Chiefs would have funded projects on both private and federal land. We got as far as NRCS signing the agreement, and then the WCS landscapes were announced. And as our Joint Chiefs application went to the RO, they put a pause on it, knowing that all of this funding was coming down through bill. So the WCS bill funds came through, and we had 3 or 4 months to put together agreements and set aside millions of dollars. And so in the fall of 2022, the Payette signed a Good Neighbor Authority agreement with Adams County. It was the first use of a county provision of GNA in Idaho. I wish I could take credit for this. This was the brainchild of the Payette Fuels Program manager, and Adams County was chosen because of our Highway 95 focal area. So these bill-funded 5-year agreements are going to be used to complete cross-boundary treatments on both private and federal land. And so the question becomes then, and the other panelists will bring this up, is what happens after 5 years when the bill funds dry up? Well, one of the things we did that was different with these GNA agreements is we set them up primarily to fund additional county staff to handle the increased workload. And with that, we set out the expectation that the counties would be pursuing more of that grant funding that's available through the state and state private forestry. And so a lot of my focus right now is working with these new positions to help them find the grants that will build on a long-term self-sustaining program by the time those bill funds dry up. So here's a quick map of the counties and the monies. Adams County, like I said, was the first in 2022. We initially put in $300,000, not quite knowing how the county's capacity would be to spend that money. The county quickly put that into an agreement with a private forestry consulting company to start handling the work. And so in 2023, we added additional funds to bring them up to almost $800,000. Valley County got $500,000. They were the last to sign. And then Boise County, because they had a fairly robust program already and just needed additional staff, they were funded at $675,000. So I'm not going to go through all of these accomplishments, but there's a few things on here that I wanted to highlight that really, in my mind, show how effective and what a great tool, good neighbor authority agreements combined with shared stewardship is in the wildfire crisis landscape. And so in Adams County, one of their first projects this year was doing 18 miles of roadside mastication in and around the communities of Bear and Cuprum. Those roads serve as the ingress and egress to those communities, and they're a combination of private roads, forest roads, and county roads. And so without the county G&A, we really didn't have a tool to bring everybody together to get that work accomplished. They treated 60 acres on mastication work on private land. And when you look at it, while that doesn't sound like a lot, when you look at the numbers across the state in Idaho through the grant programs, all counties in Idaho combined treat about 1,100 acres a year. So most counties are in the 30 to 50 acres treated a year range. Their outreach efforts have led to landowners signing up, and we have right now on board 150 acres of treatments that can be completed in 24 and 2025. We assisted them with their CWPP, and now they have submitted applications for Western States Fire Managers grants for both 2024 and 2025. Valley County just hired their new wildfire mitigation coordinator. They had a program in place for about 15 years, but it was done by a contractor, and that contractor was looking to retire. And that person's already working on the process of updating their community wildfire protection plan that expires at the end of the year. And they're taking those SRS Title III funds that normally would have went into other projects, and they're implementing FireWise grant programs to get funding directly to landowners and homeowners. So Boise County, one of the things I wanted to highlight is they've been recruiting local fire departments on our behalf to help with planning and outreach. And they're our county representative on the WCS All Lands Partnership. So these agreements have been in place, some of them for 6 months or less, and we're already seeing dividends. So
I think we might need to wrap it up here real quick and kick it over to the other two panelists so we have time for you guys to discuss afterwards.
Sure, I'll just leave this slide up here for challenges. It's not been easy, but there's some of these challenges the other folks are experiencing as well, and they'll get into more. And with that, I'll hand it over.
Thanks so much. And I think JR, you're up next.
Great. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yeah, you're
Cool.
good.
All right, I'm diving right in. So I'm JR Logan. I'm the Taos County Forest and Watershed Health Program Manager. And like I said at the outset, I'm based in Taos, New Mexico, which happens to fall within this red line known as the Enchanted Circle wildfire crisis landscape. So I wanted to start with some context in northern New Mexico. You know, every part of the country, especially in the West, has had its challenges with federal agencies. I think northern New Mexico stands out for a number of reasons. We have a large land-based indigenous and Hispano population. These are, of course, the Pueblos, tribes, and nations that existed in New Mexico since time immemorial. But then we had Spanish and Mexican settlers coming in centuries ago. And these folks still really maintain a strong connection to the land. They rely on the forest for firewood. They rely on the water in the watersheds to do traditional irrigation. And this is very much a place rooted in tradition and culture. It also happens to be a place where we see a lot of high poverty rates. We see a lot of drug addiction and alcohol abuse. And those ills in our community are being exacerbated, especially in the Taos area, by rising costs of living, which is, of course, related to income inequality as folks move into this beautiful place without really understanding what has existed here for a long time. And as maybe portrayed in the image of this woman throwing a Molotov cocktail at the Santa Fe National Forest sign, we've had some instances of real disagreement between these local communities and the National Forest over management of the land, access to its resources. So I'll start with a quick map of the Enchanted Circle. You can see we're up here on the Colorado border in north central New Mexico. This line, similar to what Brian was saying, was drawn by the state forester and some folks from the Forest Service. It's a bit of an arranged marriage in the sense that if I gray out the east side, which is Colfax County, and just include the Taos County side where I have sway over, this piece, the west slope of the Sangres, is really what I care about. And you can see this checkerboard of private, tribal in orange, and then a lot of the Carson National Forest in green, which is really the source of all of our water. And when it comes to fire in northern New Mexico, water is the concern more than anything, are the post-fire effects that we see after we see catastrophic fire. Lastly, on the map, I wanted to highlight the way on the Taos County side, we've defined focal areas, and this was pre-WCS designation. This was part of our Community Wildfire Protection Plan efforts. And it was really intended to take the scope of the county, which is relatively large, and then define it by 200 to 300,000 acre boundaries shown here, where the folks who come together in these groups, these all represent collaborative groups, have something in common and can get into the weeds and dive into the details on what matters to us, where should projects happen, but also how projects should happen. Back in 2020, it was kind of the height of COVID. I actually sat in on an RVCC webinar on agreements, and Emery and her colleagues highlighted the Tuolumne County Good Neighbor Agreement, and it just set a light bulb off in my head, because I had prior to that been kind of the Johnny Appleseed of cost share and stewardship agreements in northern New Mexico, just trying to address some of these challenges we were having between communities and federal agencies through relatively small dollar, small scope agreements, one at a time. And it worked at a pilot project basis in the sense that we got stuff done, improved concepts. But in order to scale up, the idea of repeating stewardship and cost share and every other flavor of agreement over and over again became quite unwieldy real quick. And so convincing Taos County to become a hub through a good neighbor agreement and have all of these tools at our disposal meant that we could replicate not just the good work that had been developed from the grassroots with communities all over the county, but it also made it easier for the Forest Service as an agency to manage this agreement and to put, relatively speaking, large sums of money into that agreement. This hopefully clarifies how we move that money. The Good Neighbor Agreement with the county allows money to go into these spas. And then we also, as soon as we get money from the feds, I go shake the money trees at the state and say, look, the feds are ponying up. You guys need to kick in a little bit of money too and play into that competitive nature of the governments, which helps us fundraise. And then all of that money gets funneled into Taos County. And then we become the nexus for all of this money. In turn, the county's finance department and myself and others enter into agreements with, on the left side here, these are entities of local government. So we have acequias, which are irrigation districts in northern New Mexico, and land grants, which are kind of the vestiges of the Spanish settlement period. These are both units of government in New Mexico, and it makes it possible for the county to transfer funds to them to run community-based fuel wood and fuels reduction projects in and around their neighborhoods. The Soil and Water District has an agreement with the county for a student monitoring crew that's doing all the common stand exams for this work. And then we have volunteer fire departments taking red-carded volunteers and getting them on as additional resources for RX Fire all over the county. And then on the right is the more meat and potatoes contracts, through RFPs and other procurement processes, just to get road work done and to hire professional contractors to go out there and do the work. We emphasize local contractors in that lower right-hand corner, but you know, based on the pace and scale and the demands of getting work done, it's a bit of a mix there. But it has been an opportunity to build the capacity of some of these mom and pop operators. So real quickly, the lessons learned that we've had is the good neighbor agreement of all the flavors of agreement has no match requirement. It allows for the broadest range of services, and for Taos County, it helps us get stuff done more quickly. Of course, it brings more money, and then it's helped us take the input from the community at the focal area level and turn that into real project work that the county is delegated responsibility for, rather than an agency with less connection to the community. What we've learned is we did not, in our original SPAs, budget enough funding for the county's administrative staff. It takes a lot of paperwork to get this stuff done. There's a lot of boxes to check. There's a lot of procurement that needs to happen. And we believe we're doing the feds a favor as much as they're doing us a favor. And in order to compensate the county fairly for that time, we're going to ask for more administrative funds. We'd also like to be able to do more CAT-X's in the places where the Carson National Forest planning shop isn't focused. And, you know, there's been a lot of questions about how do we make the most of this funding. I'm concerned that the Carson, under pressure from higher ups in the Forest Service food chain, is going to start leaning more towards production acres, hiring outside contractors to put numbers on the board. And the good neighbor is a good check on that, to be able to park some of this funding and allow for a little bit more thoughtful project implementation that takes into account the long-term needs of this community rather than the short-term needs of this WCS. And with that, Nick, I think you're up.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks, JR. I'll try to be pretty brief on my landscape and partnership introduction, make some time for the panel discussion here, because there's so much depth here. Watershed Center is a local partner. Our local programs in Northern California, land in partnership with the Shasta Trinity and the Six Rivers National Forest on the Trinity Wildfire Crisis Strategy landscape. Excuse me. And so I want to give a shout out as well. One of my our key colleagues here and partners, the Trinity County Resource Conservation District. Kelly Sheen's also on call or on the meeting here. And essentially the Watershed Center, the Trinity County RCD, and those two forests make up the sort of core of the planning and implementation partnerships here for the landscape. A lot of other sort of smaller partners, county with a good neighbor agreement, with the Forest Service that's brand new, is trying to build capacity, local tribes, and NRCS is a sort of core partner as well. But the Watershed Center has a 30-year history of working with the forests, doing both planning, workforce development, and implementation work. So we've been on this long-term steady ramp of sort of growing capacity and deepening the partnership, and utilizing lots of different funding to sort of build out cooperative work across public and private lands, priority work on federal lands, and to increase local impact and local participation in that work as we've sort of grown. That includes Joint Chiefs funding, sort of 3 rounds of Joint Chiefs funding that's been really helpful and kind of steady in growing out our programs. And then state of California, as many of you will know, has made massive investments over the last 5 years in particular, but over the last decade, and that's helped grow all of our programming, all of the impact. Meanwhile, there's some really robust collaborations. Trinity County Fire Safe Council, which the RCD operates, has been meeting and planning together and prioritizing since 1999. And a Trinity County Collaborative Group, which is more of a stakeholder forum, conflict resolution, to some extent, sort of prioritization that brings in and touches a lot more sort of stakeholders and community members. So nice rich kind of fabric of both collaboration and partnerships, and a long history of prioritizing sort of projects across the landscape based on all the things that the wildfire crisis strategy cares about. So I think we were a really good candidate, and the investment's landing in a good place and with a really good foundation. Looking forward, there's a fair bit of uncertainty about the sort of duration of funding that'll come through WCS. We're trying to, when the announcement first came, there's a lot of excitement and a lot of anticipation and a lot of spooling up, a lot of interest from local contractors, the mom and pops and small operators about new business opportunities. And so a lot of our work, I think right now is amidst this sort of uncertainty about the future of the funding. Hit it hard last year, we're going to hit it hard this year. How do we sort of not get off of that really strong, I think, ramp that we were on of building capacity and impact here, and make the WCS investment really hit in a good way, in a fast way, but also give it some legs that don't make it purely disruptive, make it sort of another really high impact funding source that can help us just continue to, reduce risk, increase restoration, increase local impacts. So that's it for my introduction. Pass it off to Emery and Cole.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And yeah, I want to kind of dive into that kind of pivot Nick gave us towards challenges. And we know that WCS funding has come with challenging features for all landscapes, and that it's landing on an existing context of partnerships, newer or older, depending on the landscape. So what stressors have come with that funding for each of your particular contexts, and how is it impacting partnerships, and how are you navigating those? And we are a little behind schedule. And
Nick, do you want to start us off on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of, we don't have any funding currently in agreements from WCS. So I mentioned we're on a long ramp with the Forest Service and in partnership, and a lot of money already obligated. At the start of last year when WCS money came online, the Forest Service decided to run all of it almost through blanket purchase agreements. So hit contracting hard, hit implementation hard, accomplish a lot in year one, which I think, had plenty of good rationale and sort of strategy behind it. Second year, we're looking at now, there was a lot of uncertainty around sort of agreements, whether you could park this money in existing, let's say, master stewardship agreements and just have a different funding code, or whether you needed a new agreement. We didn't get an agreement last year, partly because of that uncertainty. Working on a new master stewardship agreement, just a vessel for this funding now. And I think, the Forest Service is going to also spend a lot on blanket purchase agreements again. I think what I'm sort of puzzling over is, again, how to sort of smooth that line, ramp up impact, but not have it be just a sort of flash in the pan moment of investment here that we gear up a lot for and that trails off really quickly. And so as part of what I was puzzling about the Keystone agreements and their sort of durations, really there's a big tension, I think, for our organization in how geared up to get and how fast to hit this, how high, everyone wants us to jump. Do we just say, no, wait, we're on a ramp, let's just keep walking up our ramp, and so I think that's real tension.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, Nick. I feel very similarly. It's been our experience here in the Enchanted Circle and in northern New Mexico, I think similar to the other landscapes, that the good bedrock foundation of collaboration here was one of the primary reasons why we received this designation, especially as one of the initial landscapes. And unfortunately, if I'm being honest, I think the irony of the designation is wildfire crisis strategy has eroded a lot of that. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that the WCS being such a banner program of the Forest Service, and it's something that there's a lot of money coming through, is leaning on folks like myself for the political and the social license to actually get on the ground and implement. But at the same time, it comes with, new hiring and new staff dedicated to the wildfire crisis strategy who really don't have the context here on the ground, but are being demanded that they produce as quickly as possible. And so, I think Cole, you referred to it as stuff already happening. We always call it, there was a game in progress. And then it's almost like somebody just showed up and said, well, we're going to change the rules to this game now, even though we liked your game and that's why we're here in the first place. Similarly, Nick, we haven't seen a large influx of dollars because of WCS to the county's Good Neighbor Agreement. I'm actually okay with that. But what concerns me about the way the WCS has been overlaid with existing collaboratives at whatever scale is that agreements like our Good Neighbor Agreement are only as good as the partnerships that we've relied on to build project work and then implement it in a way where everyone feels like it's done fairly and effectively. And we're still in the growing pains of WCS and the Enchanted Circle anyways, where we haven't resolved that tension. And more than anything, I'm trying to maintain relationships that we had pre-WCS, bring new people so that we can add value and more capacity for the long run. And so I have to be optimistic that that's going to happen, but it's been a major challenge.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with both JR and Nick. I mean, unfortunately, when we rolled out that all lands playbook, it didn't account for the ongoing collaborative efforts that were already occurring in areas. And a lot of our partners are fatigued with the ever-changing, high-intensity, short-duration initiatives that they've been through with the Forest Service over the last couple of decades. And so when we've had efforts at the local level to build these long-term partnerships, the long-term durable, sustainable partnerships that go beyond these different initiatives, it kind of it pulls the rug out for some of them. And so, these WCS landscapes, they're much larger scale than a lot of our partners are comfortable working with. And they're just not set up to pivot as fast as we are requiring them to. We got a lot of money to hire additional staff and enter into agreements, but our partners haven't. We're trying to get some of that money to them, but it takes time and a lot of effort on their part, and we're all fighting for the same partners. But from a partner side of things too, I think with the WCS, what I hear a lot is they don't feel they no longer have a shared decision space. When we were working at these smaller scales, they felt like an equal voice. And now with the demands that the Forest Service is under, the targets we have to meet, the speed at which the money needs to be spent, those critical conversations that have been taking place aren't taking place anymore. And so as we move to, our landscape was one of the ones that got picked because of our cross-boundary program. And one of the challenges we realized, I don't think we realized internally, is very few of us have experience working on private ground. We're really dependent on our partners for that knowledge, the people that have run those types of programs. And we can go out, we can speak to landowners, and we can show them the latest models and why it's great. But at the end of the day, you need landowner permission to step on their property and to be able to treat it. And I've said multiple times in my job, I never thought it would be this hard to give away free money. And I think lastly, man, we're still using acres treated instead of risks reduced as our metric for success.
A frequent theme in these discussions is how we're assessing outcomes and progress. Nick, did you want to add something? I just saw your chat, but don't have time to.
Yeah, I just I want to give a shout out to both the forest and the local units who are stepping up to sort of make this happen. It's a really tough position for them to be in, to sort of deliver on the huge promise and huge potential. I think I heard it said, this is a once in a career opportunity, for people inside the agency to sort of have an impact, and holding together all of the sort of foundational sort of collaboration and partnerships while delivering on the things we measure, right? What does Congress care? What does the Washington office care about? They care about low cost, highest unit output, acres treated at the end of the day, right? And that's, there's misalignments with that they're really, that you just want to have lots of compassion and sort of empathy for them, and not have this feel like, we're villainizing anyone, nor the people in Congress or the Washington office, what the American people sort of expect us to do. So tall order, everyone working hard to deliver on it, and in a really tight time frame, so, which you all know. But
Yeah, great to get that into the room though, for sure. Thanks. Yeah, our question, I'm gonna kind of knit together a question that Cole and I were thinking about, and then what Michelle put into the chat box about how we can kind of take advantage of this opportunity to just kind of lay a foundation and a jumping off point for more equitable, community-oriented priorities. And some of the topics that we've been tossing around in these discussions is like, how can we create, yes, kind of set up processes, partners, et cetera, a foundation again for more sustainable outcomes, or kind of approaches that are really going to bring local benefit and sustainable outcomes. And so I'm wondering if we could kind of, in our last few minutes of this panel discussion, for all of you to reflect on how you're thinking about that topic in general, what's working well, and if you kind of had a magic wand, or if you could think about other ways that this wildfire crisis strategy rollout could help support those durable, sustainable, kind of really locally grounded outcomes. I think that would be a great way to end things. So whoever wants to jump in, feel free. Yeah,
I'm happy to kick it off.
Cool.
I love the question. It's something I think about a lot. I'll admit that when we got landscape designation back in 2022, we all did a little dance and got excited. And I think I used the word fire hose of money at public meetings and in local media a lot of times. And I regret allowing myself to get so caught up in the fanfare of the designation, because it distracted me from the nuts and bolts of what was working in the past. And I don't think I think those two things are compatible. I think the WCS is a once in a career opportunity. I'm still excited about it, but I think it's the responsibility of myself and other local stakeholders to help tether the frenzy and all of the political baggage and everything that comes with this initiative and with this money to the ground. And so, for a very specific response to your question, Emery, in the recent months, we've gone back to really like unsexy meetings in cramped fluorescent buildings like we used to do. Just going back to the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, which has been, again, decidedly unsexy document, but such a clear, locally based roadmap that includes all of these same partners as our checklist for what we need to do. And, so the more we can weave in the resources and the opportunities that WCS brings into a document through various revisions that's got, now a 20-year history in Taos County, that's, at least for now, been a much more effective way to balance these two things so they're not mutually exclusive, and to create some of that harmony and the long-term successes. That document points to a lot of projects and programs that say, we don't need this next year. We need this for an indefinite period of time. It's important to have it, and we can build that thing now to have it in the future.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, JR. Brian or Nick, anything that's on your mind with this question?
Yeah, I would just say, I'm still very excited about the WCS as well. I mean, when I think of shared stewardship and the idea of, aligning our treatments with our partners, we are going to be getting so much incredible work done across the landscape that it opens up more opportunities for programs like mine to go, oh, because what I often hear from landowners is, why should I treat my property or spend money treating my property? The Forest Service hasn't done anything on their side of the fence. And man, we are doing a lot on our side of the fence. And to me, that's really exciting because it's just going to draw so much more interest from our other partners to say, yes, we want to be involved in helping with the private lands work.
Yeah, I think that the thing I've been thinking a lot about is this sort of with local partners, the forests doing some multi-year sort of obligations of funding that sort of stretch for the statutory sort of period of the funding, given the sort of uncertainty about whether there'll be out year money sort of hitting. Again, I sort of said I'd like to smooth the curve on it a bit. And, I think that's tough because the local units take a hit this year in outcomes and accomplishments to obligate money into out years. And I know that the money wants, outcomes now. But I keep hearing about all this uncertainty about whether there is a next year and a, year after that of funding. And so to me, that'd be a good sort of strategic way to smooth that curve and keep the partnerships kind of growing strong and the impact growing, and to have money to leverage in out years, because for the partners, that's money to match, right? To go after state money, to go after private foundation money, to go after those other colors. And if we have to spend it all in 2 years, then year 3 and 4, where does that leave us? So I got definitely thinking a lot about that right now.
Awesome. We've got a question from Michelle in the chat real quick. It sounds like the strategy of tethering local priorities to this funding and then making sure the money actually flows to get work done and the local people know and benefit from that is really critical to making sure this doesn't further erode trust. Curious to know if there's support you need to make that a reality. Got like 1 more minute if you can touch on that super quick.
Yeah, the shorter answer is I don't know. I actually don't know what we need to make this a reality. This is all uncharted territory for us. I will say major credit to the regional office in Region 3 and to the Carson for making what they call collaborative support funding available for myself and then my counterpart on the east side of this landscape. That's been tremendously helpful in just finding the bandwidth to participate in, the extra meetings and the extra work that the WCS has brought to it. But to be honest, I don't know, what the next, let's call it 8 years, has in store for us. But we're making it work. And I will say for myself, the folks here on the ground in whatever agency or organization they work for, we really, really care about making this work. To us, it's not arbitrary abstract numbers on a dashboard somewhere. This is people's lives and livelihoods and ways of life. So we're going to make it work, with baling wire and duct tape and a lot of volunteer hours probably. But we'll see how that works out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And as we wrap up, I just want to give a couple reminders. First, the recording as well as synthesized notes for all of these sessions are going to go out eventually. First, the anonymized notes from this and the recording for just this presentation will go out as soon as possible. Second, we really, really, really appreciate everyone showing up. This is such a wonderful thing, and we've seen how many new faces there are within these efforts across the landscapes, and we really, really appreciate everyone contributing to the learning across this whole strategy. And then last, there's a really awesome question from Eitan in the chat as well about how this learning can benefit non-WCS landscapes. And I want to use that as a plug for the survey that will pop up in your browser after you close this meeting. We are transmitting all of these learnings and questions to the Washington office, and specifically the WIRIT team within the Washington office. And things like this are great questions to ask them. Please send us those questions in the survey. And with that, thank you all so much, and we will be in contact soon. And thank you especially to Brian, JR, and Nick.
Yeah, thanks y'all. Great to see everyone. Have a good rest of the day.
Good being with you all. Take care.